So every day they get moved, you can see the little squares going up the field, where they were yesterday, day before, day before, day before. And that whole procedure takes less than 60 seconds. And so every morning they get their linen changed, their bedding changed. It's like a hotel, man. It's better than a hotel. This is where we say good farming should be aesthetically and aromatically, sensually romantic. If you're walking around holding your nose and the 5-year-old is saying, ooh, yuck, it's ugly, it's probably not good farming. When people say, well, what's the criteria? On our little bags there, we say healing the land one bite at a time. And basically we've come, if it's not healing, it's not good. If we just ask the question, does this heal? It would fundamentally change the amount of Coca-Cola we drink and the kind of entertainment we do. I mean, is there anything really healing about the Kardashians? Good, healthy pasture has a bacteria called methanotrophic bacteria. That methanotrophic bacteria gobbles up and metabolizes more methane than can possibly be produced by double the amount of cows that could ever be grown on that pasture. So when the grass gets too long for the chickens, then we bring the cows in to mow the grass down for the chickens. When they're mobbed up, they have to graze very aggressively and haphazardly. We call them equal opportunity graziers, okay? They're just taking it rapidly because they know that there's 1,000 behind them, and if I don't eat this right now, there's not going to be any left in 30 minutes. And so that accelerated, aggressive grazing actually helps to prune everything on the landscape and not just let the unpalatables go to seed and begin to dominate. So it changes the successional vegetation of the landscape. And so our mandate is not to adulterate that or think we're smarter than that, but how do we duplicate that template and cut it like a pattern and lay it down on our piece of property and duplicate that synergy of nature. All right, the average American farmer is now 60 years old. Now, business analysts will always tell you that whenever an economic sector goes over 35 years old as the age of the average practitioner, that is an economic sector in decline. So what a farmer brings to the land is what makes it a farm. And so if what the farmer brings to the land can be mobile, then any piece of property can have a farm business built on it without having to own the land. You just have to have access to it. If you look closely, the horizontals have a stainless steel thread woven through. That's what carries the spark. This is space age stuff. I don't want anybody leaving here today saying, oh, we went to this farm, it was like Grandpa's farm. This is nothing like Grandpa's farm. Listen, to have a bear, coyote, dog, possum, raccoon, chicken-proof fence that 150 feet of it only weighs 12 pounds and a person can take it down and put it up in 10 minutes, Grandpa would have given his eye teeth for something like that. In Augusta County, the average cow days per acre is 80 per year. So an acre will support 1 cow for 80 days a year or 80 cows for 1 day a year. Our average is 400 cow days per acre. And we've never planted a seed or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer in 60 years. Moving, mobbing, mowing. If you take the herbivore out of its mission on any one or all three, and most, 95% of all the herbivore domestic livestock in the world is not functioning in at least one, and in America, mostly all three. They're not moving, they're in the same field all the time. They're not mowing, they're in a feedlot. And they're not mobbed up, they're spread out indiscriminately across. It takes 100 years for land that's plowed one time for it to return to all the species that were there before the day it was plowed. Not about destruction, it is about actually releasing the next forest, keeping it healthy, creating an extremely diversified ecology with more different kind of plants than would be here in any other static kind of system, and doing it with enough care that it actually builds the ecology, builds soil, and grows food at the same time. Where we are today is a result of those eating decisions we've made up until now and where our grandchildren will be when they're our age will also be a cumulative effect of the eating decisions that we've made between now and then.
It's out there happening billions and billions of times a second, everywhere we step, everywhere we are. And yet, who thought about this world in the shower this morning? See, that's the problem. That's the problem. You know, who goes into a bank for a loan with a business plan and a banker sits back and says, hey, this is a really good idea. In fact, it's such a good idea. I'm from the South, sorry. Such a good idea. I think I want to be your partner. But before I give you the check for $500,000 for your capitalization fund, I have one question. What will this business do to the earthworms and the mycorrhizae in our community? Does anybody ever ask that? See, one of our problems in our culture is that we do not have an accounting system that measures the externalized impacts of our decisions. In fact, we measure our gross domestic product. If you ruin the soil and pollute the water and destroy the juveniles so they all end up in jail, all the remediation efforts redound to societal asset called GDP. It's an insane accounting practice. So our family came to the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. I'm in the Shenandoah Valley. It's 80 miles long, 20 miles wide. It's over the Blue Ridge from Charlottesville in Virginia. If you know your history, you know it was known as the breadbasket of the Confederacy during the Civil War, that sort of thing. But if you go back, we had this governor before the Great Revolutionary War named Governor Spotswood in about 1720. And the British had all come and they'd landed on the east and they'd moved west into Charlottesville and they'd hit the Blue Ridge Mountains and they didn't go beyond that. But what was happening in those early 1700s were all this riffraff, you know, these Germans and Scots-Irish and all the riffraff kind of people, you know. And they were coming down from Pennsylvania, New York. Yeah, we had Yankees then too. And they came down and they were settling in the Shenandoah Valley. Spotswood was afraid he was going to lose, you know, the valley, what was beyond there. So he had 10 buddies. He called them the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. And he sent them across the mountain. They said, go over to the valley and scope it out. Tell me what you find. They went over to the valley and they wrote back. And their reports were that everywhere we rode in the valley, we could take the grass and tie it in a knot above the horse's saddle. It was a magnificent alpha soil silvopasture, maintained by the Native Americans, and fire and great migratory herds of buffalo, elk, prairie chickens, turkeys, pheasants, bird, herbivore, with a little bit of cultivation, the three sisters, you know, the beans, the squash, and the corn. And that was what built these soils. In fact, all the deep soils on the planet were not built under trees. They were not built under bushes. They were built under grass with herbivorous and predatory migratory patterns, hunted by four-legged and two-legged predators. Because you see, the way the planet works is solar energy comes down and it hits plants who photosynthesize that energy into it. I love to do this on farm tours with kindergarten groups. I tell the kids, hey, do all of us agree that these sunbeams we all feel out here, that they're energy? Oh, yes, they're energy. Well, could you grab me some? Grab me a couple sunbeams and hand them to me. And of course, the kids are out there big time. Well, they can't do it. Then I pluck a blade of grass and I hold it up and I say, do you realize this is sunbeams? This is sunbeams. It's the most amazing thing. I mean, isn't it amazing that through photosynthetic activity, this plant can pluck mystical sunbeams out of the air and turn them into something physical, fungible, tradable, weighable, measurable. That is in itself the biomass, the carbon of the planet that then drives the carbohydrates in the soil that Sally talked about, that drive the land healing, that drive the organic matter, that drive the carbon-centric element of the soil. That's what drives the entire thing. And so this plant grows in a sigmoid curve, an S curve. It's kind of like this, all right? A S curve. It starts slow when it grows, then it grows real fast, and then it slows down and goes into senescence. I call the first part diaper grass, the second part teenage grass, the third part nursing home grass. Now, the way nature works with the buffalo, with the herbivores, the reason there are herbivores all over the planet, from llamas and alpacas to zebras to caribou to buffalo to cows to goats to sheep, the reason that there are herbivores all over the planet is because this S-curve biomass, if left unpruned, simply falls into senescent nursing home stage and volatilizes its carbon and doesn't get restarted into this rapid metabolic sunbeam conversion into carbon sequestration. So nature, in order to restart this rapid biomass accumulation, has the herbivore come along right as it goes into senescence. That's when all the carbohydrates and sugars are high enough to feed these 4 big sauerkraut vats in this 4-legged portable mowing critter. The herbivore is a great big portable sauerkraut vat that takes in this biomass, ferments it inside, and turns it into meat and milk and bone and hide and all sorts of things. For the Native Americans, the buffalo was a walking supermarket. It was their shelter, their instruments, their tools, their food, everything. So that's how nature works. And it's fundamentally carbon-centric. All right. So what happened was, when the Europeans came into the Shenandoah Valley, they saw this beautiful tall grass and this beautiful alpha soil, and they brought with them a grain-based, annual-based economy. They didn't take time to ask the natives, how have you built this for millennia? They simply translocated their holy grail of grain, and in the day, grain was extremely expensive. This is the first time in human history grain has been cheap. But back then, grain was very expensive. It's always been the holy grail. Why? Because tillage is very difficult to maintain, very difficult to do, and very difficult to keep grain away from rats and vermin in a day before storage containers, sheet metal, mesh steel, and those kinds of things. And so grain was always expensive, very expensive. I mean, in the Bible, it talks about a harlot being sold for an ephah of barley. It's not because harlots were cheap. And so grain has been very precious. The food of the commoner has always been herbivore-based. It's always been animal-based. It's always been either seafood or animal-based, especially herbivore, because that is what is nutrient-dense, that doesn't require refrigeration, that actually moves in real time, that a family can move and doesn't have to carry about a bunch of lentils and grain in a pot. Trust me, when Daniel Boone went to visit Kentucky, he wasn't dangling watermelons and zucchinis on the back of his saddles. He was carrying Tonka. Okay? And that's why all impoverished cultures in the world have an animal-based agrarian foundation under them, because when you're relocated, when you're invaded or you have to move or you have to flee or whatever, you can take a cow with you or a goat and milk it in real time for nutrients for your babies when you don't have refrigeration and you can't carry a bunch of lentils and beans around. So the animal component is a critical part. So we came to this farm. It was gullied, worn out, a rock pile. It was the armpit of the community. It only generated about $10,000 a year, a quarter of a salary, and couldn't produce anything, maybe 20 cow days per acre. So we looked at that piece of land and we said, how does nature work? And we looked at these templates in nature and we saw, wow, nature builds soil with perennials, not annuals. So an agricultural economy that actually works should be centered on perennials, not annuals. And yet everything about U.S. ag policy is to promote annuals, not perennials. So our entire agricultural system is funding and concessionizing and subsidizing land degradation. Second thing, there is no animal-less ecology. There is no ecosystem that functions without animals. Now we have a vegetarian vegan rise that assumes that we can abdicate this animal-centric role in ecosystems and think that everything can just run on vegetable matter. It can't. It doesn't. It never has. So all functioning ecosystems have animals. So we have to inject animals. I mean, Audubon sat under a tree. He said, I couldn't see the sun for 3 days for the flock of birds that flew over. How do these animals work? They move. Amazingly today in our culture, we don't think animals are supposed to move. They're supposed to be locked up in a confinement factory. But in ecosystems, animals move and harvest biomass here, poop it out over here, and create democratized fertility opportunities for the biomass area that they live in. Because nature can't move fertility from gravitational downhill uphill, except a bird fly it up or an herbivore walk it up and poop it. Are you with me? There's a very visceral, significant role of animals in nature, which is to democratize soil plant opportunity. That's the first time you heard that, I'll bet. But think about it. How are you going to move the fertile valleys to the hilltops in nature? You're going to do it and the predators, both two-legged and four-legged, the predators help the animals to instinctively want to eat down here and lounge up there so they can look out and see who's going to come and get them. So the predator, the beautiful predator-prey choreography that sounds violent to us is actually the nurturing caress of the womb holding democratized fertility in place. So we saw, all right, we got to have animals. So we move how these animals move. They move around. So we use high-tech electric fencing to be able to biomimic the great migratory patterns of herbivores throughout nature. So every day, the herd gets moved to a new paddock. Every day at 4 o'clock, we move the herd, 500, 600, 800 strong. We move them to the next paddock. We call this mob stocking, herbivorous solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization. And if every farm in America that had livestock would practice this, it would build so much soil, that humus, organic matter, that in fewer than 10 years we would sequester all the carbon that's been emitted since the beginning of the industrial age. Well, the next thing we said, well, how do we build soil? Is built with carbon. Not with 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer, with carbon. So we got a wood chipper and we began composting. But we don't compost with big machinery. We add corn in there. The corn ferments in the bedding pack. We put the pigs in. You know, if all pigs, you look at their forehead, it says, will work for corn. We put the pigs in. The pigs seek the fermented corn and aerate it, pig aerate, oxygenate the whole pile. And so the animals do the work. Suddenly you're hiring, your animals are not now just bacon and eggs and T-bones. They are actually co-laborers and fellow ministers in this great land healing project. And that fundamentally changes the spiritual and emotional relationship we have with our team and our players. And the pigs don't need their oil changed. They don't need spare parts. You know, they don't need social insecurity or anything. When you get done with them, you eat them. You know, it's just a wonderful relationship. All right. So then we're putting on this compost, and we're starting to see the grass grow, and we're seeing these bare gullies heal over, and we're seeing these bare rock piles. The soil builds up. It actually builds up like a wound on your hand, how it roils up over the wound. And we watched over the years as these big open soilless galls, rock galls, just gradually crept in 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet. And over the period of time now since 1961, they have all healed up. They're still thin soil, but they have soil on them. And the whole farm has become a productive, verdant area, producing up to 400 cow days per acre and generating $500,000 in income on the same acreage that half a century ago only could support 10 cows and $10,000 a year. Suddenly, now, the economy of that farm drives the entire, we call ourselves the reverse economy. We are pulling money out of the urban sector and plugging it into the rural economy instead of the other way around. Most economies work on depleting the rural wealth to ingratiate the urban wealth, and we're bringing it back the other way. We're bringing labor back to the farm. So we have a team of 20 people that's involved in moving all this stuff around. So we're trading drugs and capital-intensive stationary infrastructure with labor, management, and local customers. So we don't apologize that our system takes more labor. It doesn't take more labor in the long run because there's nothing to heal from externalized oopses. What it does is it provides real-time labor for real sacred ministry in a real place, anchored to a real umbilical in a visceral connectedness. That's what it does. And that enables both our team and our customers to participate in ecological healing. So on our little baggies, our motto is healing the land one bite at a time, because ultimately our position is that we need to be environmentalists by participation, not by abandonment. I get the guilt complex. The story of history of civilization is too often the story of abuse, conquistador mentality, rape, and pillage. I get that. I understand it. But the answer is not to extricate humans from the landscape. It is to take our big brain and mechanical ability and intellectually and mechanically view our landscape and use our hands as a masseuse, not a rapist. It is to use our intellectual and mechanical ability for help, for healing, and not for hurt. And what we've been able to see is a magnificent response. We have this mentality in our country that nature is this reluctant partner that we have to force and rest and move, and I'm going to get you in a head choke and make you grow. Our view is that nature is a benevolent lover that responds to our caress. And this is not a place of scarcity. It is a place of unimaginable abundance. If we will learn to respect and honor and come to nature with the kind of humility, respect, and sacredness that nature asks us to come to. So just imagine, in your wildest imagination, just imagine if all of the petroleum chemical fertilizer used in Virginia were instead rechanneled into a carbon-centric composting, carbon-centric soil building program. Think of the job creation. Think of the wars we wouldn't have to fight to keep oil cheap. Think of the petroleum that could stay in the ground. Think of the hydration that would happen and the floods that would not happen because now the soil, 1 pound of organic matter holds 4 pounds of water. The best way to hydrate the landscape, and we are in a place that needs landscape hydration, let me tell you, is to increase organic matter. On our farm in 50 years, we've gone from 1% organic matter average to 8% organic matter. All you have to do nationwide is go from 1% to 2%, and we would mitigate all the carbon that's been emitted since the beginning of the industrial age. This is not difficult, folks. The tragedy of our time is not that we're lazy and not that we're ignorant. The tragedy is that we're busy about the wrong things. So we've learned how to grow corn with GMO technology and GPS technology with driverless tractors from manipulated computer banks 1,000 miles away in a 5th floor office building in a city. But nobody's asking, why should we grow that corn? We've become, as Stan Parsons, author and founder of the Ranching for Profit School, says, we've become extremely good at hitting the bullseye of the wrong target. Trust me, if all of the money and time and energy that's gone into Los Alamos had gone into permaculture, high pond building, water mitigation, and carbon centricity agriculture, today, this area would be an Eden. And it would be flood-proof and drought-proof. And we could have led the world into a redemptive landscape capacity. And I would suggest that that is a goal and a vision starting with soil and the life and the biology, our relatives, our cousins in the soil that have their cousins inside of us and around us. We're only 15% human. We're 85% unhuman. Every one of our cells has 3 bacteria hooked up to it. I mean, we're really inhuman. We're really pretty insignificant in that big picture of things. But we are the most significant hurter or healer the way we extend our hands. God help us to extend them as a friend, not as a foe. Now may all of your carrots grow long and straight. May your radishes be large and not pithy. May tomato blossom end rot affect your Monsanto neighbor's tomatoes and not yours. May the coyotes be struck blind at your pastured poultry. May all of your culinary experiments be delectably palatable. May the rain come gently on your fields, the wind be always at your back. Your children rise and call you blessed, and may we all make our nest a more magnificent place than we inherited. Thank you so much for letting me visit you.